When it comes to the conversation around the character of Dr. Eggman, the roly-poly arch-nemesis of everyone's favorite blue blur, one tends to find that it's quite often centered around his more modern depictions. Adventure versus the so-called dark era, those eras combined versus the meta outings. Was Jim Carrey's portrayal of the character accurate? These are all great topics of discussion, but I think that in all the chaos around this particular subject, which Eggman is in fact the best Eggman, we've perhaps lost sight of one of the most important aspects of his character. That's right, today we're going to give classic Eggman his time to shine, and frankly, I could not be happier. Ever since he swung his giant ball around in the very first Sonic game ever, oh my god! Eggman, or Dr. Robotnik if that's more your thing, has been a force to be reckoned with for over 30 years, becoming as timeless a series villain as any of the other heavy hitters you can think of. When people think of his many exploits, more often than not, their minds will tend to jump straight to things like when he tried to nuke Station Square, blowing up half the moon, shattering the planet and turning Sonic into a cuddly, elasticated karate chop monster, or his brief attempt at creating an OnlyFans. But this guy has been up to no good for a long time now, and I'd like to share with you all why, for me, his classic depictions are just as important as his more recent ones. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe for more Sonic and gaming discussions from me, and make sure to hit that bell icon so you never miss a video. But for now, let's get started, shall we? At first, I think the sheer brilliance and horrific evils of Robotnik's character were on the more understated side. After all, the first game was all about establishing this guy in the minds of kids and teens the world over. On the surface, this game was about a super cool, lightning-fast hedgehog hopping on a bunch of robots to stop some mad scientist taking over the world. You only need to take a quick look at all the different regional box art for the game to know exactly who was carrying the marketing hopes of the series. I mean, yeah, Eggbotnik is technically on the EU cover art, if you kinda squint at it, turn it on its side and really focus, but there really was no question that the spotlight was squarely on Sonic. It didn't take long though before this would all start to change, with Big Stash going on to get some seriously primed real estate on a lot of these covers. Sega had successfully established their main man in the industry, and now it was time to expand his universe with one truly badass nemesis. It's funny, whether it's the West's Robotnik or Japan's Eggman, despite all the obvious evidence to the contrary, as a kid in the 90s, I never really seen Robotnik as a goofy villain. Some might call that pure ignorance. I call it being willingly gaslit by my favorite Sonic cartoon of all time. That's right, at the same time the Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog was a thing, probably the goofiest show centered around an anthropomorphic hedgehog ever to grace a television, my edgy child brain projected its love for the more serious SatAM show straight onto the video games, with any gaps in that translation filled nicely by the Fleetway Sonic comic. There was just something about this ruthless and entirely serious version of Robotnik's character that just captivated me. And their use of things like the roboticizer, global domination, and even Mecha and Metal Sonic really helped make the games all the more special for me. But even back in those 16-bit days, when the narratives in games were still at a fledgling stage, it wasn't hard to see that this Eggman was a seriously rotten dude. You look at him with his Humpty Dumpty figure, mad grin, and presidential mustache, and you never suspect for a minute that he's busily jamming adorable animals into robots and using their still-living bodies to power them. It's f***ing horrifying. Robotnik was always the perfect antagonist for Sonic, and that nature versus machine conflict would go on to fuel the narrative in every media arm of the franchise. Sonic is the freedom-fighting, thrill-seeking free spirit, and Eggman is the oppressive tyrant who wants to bend the world to his will, and any who won't bend, he will break. With a genius 300 IQ and skills in pretty much every form of engineering, coupled with being a next-level sociopath and narcissist, Robotnik considers himself above everyone and everything. He has no empathy at all for the living things he abuses. To him, these creatures are disposable, only really existing for him to use up and throw away. And it was this side of him from the SatAM cartoon that I began to notice more and more in the games. For whatever reason, even as a kid, I always seen anything with a goofier Robotnik as its own thing, separate to my own little headcanon. I don't know what it was, I guess I just like my stories bleak. I wasn't a weird kid at all. But if there's one thing you can say about Eggman's goals though, it's that he is one incredibly consistent guy. From the very beginning, no matter where you seen him, all he wanted was to build his own empire and rule it with an iron fist. Whether that be Robotropolis, Ruler of Mobius, Robotnik Land, Eggman Land, sprinkle a few casinos and amusement parks over it and that was an egg basket he was happy to call home. The only problem was a pesky blue rodent. I think, at least at first, Robotnik thought his bid for world domination would be easy. And to be fair to him, why shouldn't it be? He was the smartest person on the planet, and he had his own personal badnik army.
What could possibly go wrong?
I think that when Sonic foiled his plans in the original game, Eggman knew then and there that he would have to seriously up his game. And oh boy did he ever up his game. Using his defeat on South Island as motivation, Robotnik set to prove without a doubt that his ingenuity and intellect were beyond all comprehension. His creations becoming more and more effective and often built to a staggering scale. Honestly, to the point where I think that, were it not for Sonic befriending the likes of Tails and Knuckles, it's entirely possible that Robotnik could have eventually won. They've both pulled Sonic's ass out of the fire plenty, and it's often Eggman's complete lack of understanding around teamwork and friendship that leads to his downfall. But for all his outward confidence and bluster, repeated defeats at the hands of Sonic and friends are blows to his ego that he just can't accept, persistently coming back bigger and badder time and time again to achieve his goal of world domination. But now there was a much more personal element to his vision. Sonic stands for everything Robotnik hates, and as bad as it was that this blue rodent had the time stones to stand up to him, he was also inspiring others to rally behind him. You know, as much as I hate that Hedgehog is associated mostly with the more lighthearted Adventures cartoon, I still think that the catchphrase itself is perfection for the character. Beyond his simple desire to rule the world, I think it's Robotnik's hatred for Sonic that drives him hardest. Each defeat only serving to make him more determined than ever to personally destroy him. And I honestly think this accelerated, or at the very least feeds into, his unmitigated levels of narcissism. Yes, he wanted to take over the world and name it after himself, but in the first game you didn't really see a whole lot of Eggman-inspired designs, be that in its enemies or locations. We had hints at the beginnings of his theme park fetish and plenty of smog-producing factories, but there wasn't really any badniks or bosses in his own image. But after his defeat to Sonic, that's when his obsession with his own likeness really kicked off. The Death Egg robot in Sonic 2, the Death Egg itself, which we only got to see properly in Sonic 3, complete with its own army of miniature robot mini-me's. Unhealthy or not, that's pretty impressive. Who doesn't want a robot that looks like themselves and snorts fire? This guy wanted everyone to know exactly who was conquering them, especially when it came to Sonic and those associated with him. And he was happy to burn the place down if necessary. I always felt that during the classics, Robotnik's evil seemed to grow alongside the game's audience. The plot of each subsequent game becoming bigger and better than the last. The stakes were always raised that bit higher, and by the time the adventure era came around, the characters and plot would be more prominent than ever. I think for me, one of the best things about the classic games having a more subtle story was that it was tremendously easy to supplement the lore in their universe with content from the cartoons or comics, allowing for a lot more subjectivity to the characters, especially in the case of Dr. Jiggle Physics himself. We could all see whatever we wanted in him. For some, the goofy, eccentric narcissist hell-bent on world domination. For others, the relentless and cruel dictator who plans to wipe out all organic life on Earth in the most horrific ways possible. As a fan, you had much more creative control over everything, and no internet to tell you were wrong. There were no self-aware parodies or endless jokes at his expense, at least in the games. Sonic & Co. treated Eggman as a very real threat, and as a result, the audience took him seriously too. Yeah, he got a lot of his ideas from Star Wars, but so did a lot of villains at that time. I wonder if they had like a 90s villain convention or something? A place where all our favorite evildoers could go for support and inspiration? It's the only way to explain how every bad guy back then had the same ideas. What I liked about how Robotnik was handled back then was that even though he was the main threat in every game, he never had any shortage of ideas when it came to keeping things fresh. Each badnik, each Eggmobile mod, each tool of destruction was more creative and deadly than the last. I was never bored of him, and I never really felt he needed anything extra to justify himself. He was my all-purpose, self-contained blob of villainy, and I absolutely loved him right from the beginning. Also, he was faster than Sonic, nullifying Sonic's unique selling point and thereby making him the most pointless hero ever. And on that bombshell, I'd like to hear what you guys think. Does anyone else have a soft-boiled spot for classic Eggman? How do you think he compares with the later iterations of his character? And what are some of your personal favorite Eggman moments from any time in the series? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found yourself enjoying the video, don't forget to drop a like, subscribe to the channel, and make sure to hit that bell icon. If you don't hit that bell, you pretty much aren't subscribed, so make sure to give it a little love tap to see more from me. You can also join the channel Discord, follow me on Twitter, or even support me on Patreon or with a super thanks. All your support is much appreciated, and it really helps me keep doing this silly thing that I love. All those links are in the description, so be sure to check them out if you can. But for now, a big thank you for watching, and as always guys, take care.